Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation of Behind the Mask, the Historical Zorro and Mexican-American Experience in Early California History. My name is Professor Javier Gonzalez-Meeks. I'm assistant professor here at Miramar College. This presentation is sponsored by our IDEA Committee and our new Cultural Appreciation Club. So thank you for those that helped sponsor this presentation of Behind the Mask. And so just to begin, a little background of Zorro, for those that might be or not too familiar with Zorro. The story begins back in 1919. It's a U.S. story written by Johnston McCulley, an Irish-American author who wrote this captivating tale of this Mexican during colonial Spanish period in colonial California under the control of Spain, of Don Diego Vega. It'll later be changed to Don Diego de la Vega. Now, Don Diego, he comes from a very affluent family. His mother would pass away, sadly. His father was very rich, and so he lived in this huge, large hacienda. And in his hacienda, he had different passageways and tunnels that led to an underground cave where he would have his own secret operations, where he would also Don Diego de la Vega would operate also as the masked vigilante Zorro. Down in his cave, he would have his trusty steed, Tornado, and there he will go out into the night and fight against political corruption. A lot of it was doing with the Spanish governor and helping the poor. Very Robin Hood-esque type of a story. And this story captivated a lot of U.S. Americans, a lot of it because within this time period, we're going to enter into the affluent 1920s, where the uber rich are making a lot of money and the poor are getting poorer. It sounds a little similar like today, and it kind of sadly is very similar, where you have the story of the rich getting richer and the poor consistently, trying to make ends meet. Within a year after the publication of The Curse of Capistrano, the first story of the Zorro series, it got added as a silent film. It was bought by a film company. The book publisher would actually go out and request to Johnston McCulley to publish more stories, which was kind of shocking for the author because at the end of the story, Don Diego de la Vega revealed his identity as not just Zorro, but as the Don. And so he was kind of confused and said, sure. He wrote more serials, wrote about 5 books and a couple more short stories. And the rest would just take on. We have various movies that'll be produced. Disney bought a whole series of different Zorro films. And we'll see the legacy, even on the film here. The last Zorro movie, motion picture, was in the 1980s, 1998, with Antonio Banderas and Sir Anthony Hopkins playing actually the title character of Don Diego de la Vega, where Antonio Banderas plays the understudy that'll take on the mask of Zorro. And the story of Zorro has a lot of very fascinating and long-lasting qualities. Bob Kane, the author and creator of Batman, will credit the creation of Batman to Zorro. Here you have, Bruce Wayne, a very wealthy, affluent individual, but parades at nighttime, wearing a black mask, not using guns, but using his wits to fight crime and to help out the poor. And then you can see on the slide here, various other kind of personas of Zorro, from the Princess Bride with Inigo Montoya seeking justice after the death of his father, to even Antonio Banderas coming back again as the voice of Puss in Boots, and to also a Canadian film series called The Queen of Swords, that actually puts a gender spin on Zorro, where the young lady where Zorro is a young lady, and then you have a late 1990s anime, a Japanese anime film called Zorro, and most recently is this collaboration of Quentin Tarantino with his film Django, and combining with Zorro and having this kind of multiverse kind of a Western. And honestly, I was reading some of the online stuff about it, and it came very close. Quentin Tarantino actually contacted Antonio Banderas and asked and was inquiring, like, hey, would you be interested in reprising your role as Zorro and coming back and having this film of Django and Zorro? And sadly, it's not going to come to fruition. We just have the comic books. That's all we have for that. Would be very interesting take, looking at Jamie Foxx's Django fighting with the very older Antonio Banderas' character of Zorro. So all of this lasting legacy of the different stories of Zorro, has a very kind of appeal to the masses. But there's some historical truth to the creation of Zorro. Who was Zorro? Who was Zorro based on? And that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to look at through this presentation some of the real life individuals that were inspiration for the author of the Zorro, The Curse of Capistrano, and we'll also see what the social and political background of what happened, what created Zorro, right? Was it the post Mexican American War and the post Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the treatment of Mexicans? All of that is going to have a major influence on the different banditos, right, or the different outlaws or different heroes, depending on how you look at this, during the early California history. And we're going to see all these different individuals, some parts that will create this interesting historical, from historical truth to what we'll see as fantasy of this character of Zorro. So to begin, I am a historian, and just to have a little background of what we're doing, what is happening here in California. Now, we have to give credit. The indigenous Kumeyaay have been on this land for thousands of years, 12,000 years. They've been here forever. And it's not we start to see the story of the Zorro kind of take place a little bit after the Spanish conquest of Tenochtitlan in 1521, right here around Mexico City. About 20 years later, we'll have the continued Spanish exploration and expeditions to look for that passage to India. The Spanish, remember, all the way back to Columbus, right? Columbus got lost going across the Atlantic, trying to find China, trying to find India, got lost. The Spanish are still trying to figure it out. I mean, remember, they don't have Google Maps, they don't have satellites. They're trying to figure out the distance. Where is China? Where is India? So we have here is Juan Rodrigo Cabrillo, who is commissioned to travel up Alta California to look like maybe India or maybe China up north. So he makes his way up. He actually lands here in San Diego Bay. We have the Cabrillo landing that reenacts that landing. Now, Cabrillo's expedition is not one of conquest, but of exploration. So he's exploring, he's checking things out. When he lands here in San Diego Bay, he actually names it San Miguel. He does have interactions with the indigenous population, but it's usually the indigenous population coming to him because of the other conquistadors, the other Spanish conquistadors that are making their way up from Mexico City, making it up north looking for another Tenochtitlan. I mean, after Cortez sacked with his allies Tenochtitlan, there was rumors of another possible city of gold, the El Dorado, right? So you have all this passion by the conquistadors to look for another Tenochtitlan, and so that motivates a lot of conquistadors to travel and look up north. So as Cabrillo is traveling north, he interacts with a lot of the indigenous people, and they're telling him like, hey, your brethren are not really nice, right? And so that's the initial part of what we'll see a Spanish interaction with the indigenous population here in Alta California. Not for another 200 years is when the Spain will start having more of a foothold in California. What we have is more and more, by this time, more and more European explorations. You have already the French already making the way up the St. Lawrence River in North America and Canada. You already have the British in the Atlantic seacoast off the east coast of what is today New England. And then you have the Russians. All right, those Russians. They keep coming back again, right? The Russians are making the way across the Alaska, across Asia, across the Bering Strait into Alaska and making their way south. So for the Spanish, if you want to maintain your colonial possession, it's not just more just saying like, hey, I have all that land right here. You need to have bodies. You need to have people there to claim it. So what we have is the establishment of the mission system. The mission system serves twofold. One, for forced labor of the indigenous population, but it's also a means of converting the indigenous population to Catholic Christianity. There will be a lot of revolts, a lot of resistance to the mission system, as the missions are taking the young youths of the different indigenous population, preventing them from going back home, preventing them from meeting their family. I mean, it is strict indoctrination into Catholic Christianity and preventing them from meeting or talking to their families. And so what you have is a lot of groups, even here, the Kumeyaay, that actually staged a revolt against our own mission here, the one right off the 15 and the 8 freeway, the San Diego de Alcala. The first mission, there you go, right down the bottom, led a revolt against the mission because of the abuses of their children, of their relatives, of the mission system. The mission system, making its way up the coast as a way to kind of lay claim, like, oh, build one here, build another one further north, build another one. It's kind of like hopping up north so you could claim the coast of California, so you can claim California. With the creation of the mission system, it also needs protection because of the abuses of the indigenous population and the revolts. And writing, which makes sense, you have presidios, military forts, 4 major presidios that are established, all for two main purposes. One, to protect the missions and to protect the cities that are going to hopefully be attract a lot of farmers and a lot of families from central Mexico into California. Keep in mind that Mexico, let me go back just a little bit. Mexico City, the Tenochtitlan area, lives in this Altiplano region. It's high elevation, volcanic region. You have a lot of great soil here for agriculture. Right here is perfect for agriculture. Here, we live here in Southern California, not the best. I mean, we have the aqueducts, we have the river, the water's coming to us. We're in a drought, not ideal for farming. So it becomes very hard for a lot of the Spanish governors and the Spanish crown to entice people to come up into Alta California, especially, I mean, that's why it takes about almost 200 years to establish a presence here. People don't want to come up here. The Spanish, the mestizos, they don't want to come. Those that do kind of flee are actually fleeing from like the Spanish Inquisition, trying to flee oppression from Mexico City. And so what you have is these presidios established to protect the missions and also to protect the citizens, hopefully, that are coming into the new city. If you think about, if you've ever been to Old Town San Diego, if you look at Old Town, you can see the presidio right above you, right there off the 5 and the 8 freeway. I mean, if you look at the presidios it has direct view for protecting the major city, Old Town San Diego, but also down the 8 freeway, you have the mission San Diego de Alcala to protect as well. So the presidio, established as a major fort to protect the people and its Spanish interest in that region. All the while, what we have is another group after 1776. We have our years. So going back to year 1769, 1776. There's a new nation, United States of America, and even though we don't think of the United States, our country, as an imperialist, expansionist nation, it is. I mean, the whole early history of the United States is imperialism. And it's hard to think that because, the founding fathers of 13 colonies, we're we picked up our bootstraps and fought that evil empire, the British Empire. And then we turn around and start doing the exact same thing because the United States is British. The founding fathers are British. It's a civil war. We don't think about that. Oh, it's a revolutionary. No, it's a civil war. English fighting English because the English didn't want to pay their taxes here in the 13 colonies. Keep in mind that in the British Caribbean islands had more money coming out of Barbados and Jamaica than the 13 colonies. And those British colonists did not complain about paying taxes, and neither did the English back home. The British Crown will relax some of the taxes, but what we see is a different system that happens. Who knows, right? We have now our 50 states and territories and organizations. And after the formation of the United States and the 13 colonies, and then around the 1800s, a major change in U.S. history when Thomas Jefferson takes on the presidency as he buys the Louisiana Purchase, this whole area right around here from Napoleon. Napoleon didn't really care for the territories in the Atlantic. He wanted to expand his French empire in the Mediterranean. He wanted to make France great again, recreating another type of Roman Empire. And so Thomas Jefferson was able to buy Louisiana Purchase, and then he paid Lewis and Clark on an expedition to look for a river. Just like the Mississippi River connects north and south, Thomas Jefferson was hoping to find a river like the Mississippi that went east and west. Why? Because that way you can have access to the Pacific coast and you can have access to the Asian markets in the Pacific. And so Thomas Jefferson was looking for that. Lewis and Clark failed in finding it. So, we might today, school children, and we're like, yeah, Lewis and Clark expedition, Sacagawea, yay. But for Thomas Jefferson and during their time period, they were failures. They did not find what Thomas Jefferson wanted, which was a major river that went east and west. About 20 years later, we'll have the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, continuing the U.S. policy of assault and violence and against Native Americans, indigenous people, that has been part of, going all the way back to George Washington. And so Andrew Jackson actually, contacted Mexico. Mexico, gained its independence 1821. So right around Mexico just gained its independence. Andrew Jackson calls, telegraphs the new country of Mexico. Is like, hey, how about we purchase the United States, that little port over here, San Francisco, by the port. The New Mexican government says, no, we're not going to sell the port of San Francisco. Sourdough bread is way too yummy. That's not true. Sourdough bread is yummy, but about the sourdough bread, it's not true. And so what you have is Andrew Jackson, again, this is probably from Thomas Jefferson to Andrew Jackson, looking out west, trying to get to the Pacific coast. Then we have around the late 1830s, 1840s, the presidency of President Polk. President Polk went on a presidential platform to, expand, literally says, we're going to expand the United States. We're going to get California. It's part of our manifest destiny. And this painting right here by John Gast is called, it's basically manifest destiny. Here you have this, angelic figure in the middle, but that represents liberty. That represents, quote unquote, progress. That is the United States. And you look at the painting here, you have what? Telegraph wire, you have a stagecoach, you have steam engines. So you have technology, you have, quote unquote, progress that's making its way from the East Coast, making its out west. And what is coming, right? You have agricultural farmers, right? You need the farmers to fill the land. And so you have agricultural farmers moving out west. And what you have out here in the west, right? It's dark, it's gloomy, it's kind of represents, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings movies, like Mordor, right? Over there is Sauron, you see the hobbits running away. But you have indigenous people, right, in the crossroads. They're being pushed off their ancestral lands for, quote unquote, progress. So President Polk, on a platform to expand the United States government and the territories. All the while, around the same time period, we have a lot of instability happening in Mexico. With Mexico itself, from 1821, when it gained its independence from Spain, was a very much, I would use, an anti-federalist type of a country, meaning the states had a lot more autonomy and rights, and the central federalist government did not. So it kind of goes back, if you're familiar with U.S. history, the beginning parts of the United States was anti-federalist, and you have a lot of the Federalist Papers, advocating for a strong central government. And so you have a lot of, revolts and rebellions that, basically, show a lot of anti-federalists, like, hey, we need this. We have the creation of the Bill of Rights, all that that was switched the United States from the Articles of Confederation, anti-federalist papers, to the new Constitution, which is a federalist document. In Mexico, their first constitution is very much an anti-federalist type of a government. And it's right around this time period, around the 1840s, you have President Santa Anna, a military cabildo, a lot of military victories. And he doesn't mind having the autonomy of the states. He gets to go to his hacienda, he's president, he's fine with it. But his vice president actually is enacting a lot of policies that are kind of infuriating a lot of the conservatives. So a lot of the military generals and conservatives go to Santa Anna and say, hey, you need to do something. So Santa Anna goes to Mexico City, redrafts the Constitution, makes it more federalist. That infuriates not just Texas, but every single state in Mexico. And there's a lot. I mean, this is all part of Mexico. When you think about it today, it's California, you have Nevada, you have Colorado, Utah, and then you have Sonora, you have Chihuahua, Guanajuato. All those states are angry at Santa Anna for changing the Constitution. And that is when we have the Tejanos, the Mexicans living in Texas, and a lot of the Anglo immigrants that have been coming into Texas. The Mexico, because, like I said earlier, with Spain trying to bring people into California, Mexico trying to do the same too, trying to attract people into a lot of these territories to claim it. But we also have, and it sounds very interesting or confusing, but Mexico was trying to whiten their population. Now, keep in mind too, a lot of Mexicans are of Spanish descent. A lot of them are from the peninsula, right? So not every Mexican is a mestizo, mixed race, mestizaje. So you have a lot of Mexicans that look at whiteness with superiority. And that goes all the way back to Casta paintings to the early Spanish colonial period. So Mexico was trying to attract a lot of Anglo-Americans into Texas. A lot of these Anglo-Americans had to, vow to be new Mexican citizens and to adopt Christianity. Now, Mexico already abolished slavery in 1821, decades before the United States would. And I would say the United States hasn't ended slavery. I mean, the 13th Amendment clause still allows slavery. So in Mexico, there is no slavery. You have a clause like what if, maybe, that it's still there. So what we can say is, Mexico's already ended slavery, centuries before the United States has, and without any stipulation. So you have the Tejanos that fought against Santa Anna and gained their independence. Santa Anna will be exiled until we see a small incident. Texas will then be adopted or into United States government. The government of Mexico never recognized this treaty between Santa Anna and Sam Houston. When Santa Anna, when he signed it, at the time, the boundary of Texas, according to the Mexican government, was this river right here. This is the River Nueces, the Nueces River. For Sam Houston, no, it's over here, the Rio Grande. And you look at it, and that makes the outline of what we think of Texas today. And so for the Mexican government, it was always the Nueces River. For Sam Houston and the Anglo-Americans living in Texas, it was the Rio Grande. President Polk knew this. President Polk President Polk actually contacted, during all this infighting, all this chaos in Mexico, contacted the Mexican government and said, hey, I will buy California $30 million. And the Mexican government said, no, we're not selling California. We're not selling any of our states, especially not for $30 million. And that is $30 million at that time. That's not including modern day inflation, which would be, a lot of money. And so President Polk will then send U.S. military troops across the Nueces River, right on the boundary of the Rio Grande River, right around here. A lot of Mexican soldiers were on the other side of the Rio Grande River. And so what you have is, just a whole bunch of 20-year-olds, a whole bunch of hotheads, and someone fired a shot. U.S. American was shot, killed, and that was enough for President Polk to spread news that American soldiers killed on American land, which is not really true since they were in a disputed territory right here between Texas and Mexico. One senator from Illinois actually wanted proof of what happened, and challenged President Polk, and that was Senator Abraham Lincoln of Illinois. And so what we have is this President Polk provoking this war, allowing for the U.S. troops to enter and fight into Mexico. At the same time, right on this period, the book of Hernan Cortez' conquest of Mexico City, of Tenochtitlan, was published from the Spanish into the English and actually read by a lot of military soldiers in the military academies in the United States. Some soldiers like Robert E. Lee and Ulysses Grant. And so you have military U.S. Soldiers that have an idea, an outline of how to conquer Mexico City. And the United States actually went in and captured Mexico City. They had Mexico City. Now, they could have taken all of Mexico. They had the capital city, but it's way too many brown people for the United States at that time. They just wanted California all the way to this part of Texas. That's all they wanted. That's what Polk wanted. And what we have is with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, eventually for 1848, after the Mexican-American War, keep in mind too, a lot of the states were not willing to provide soldiers, Mexican soldiers, to the federal government because they felt that that was a federalist problem and not their own problem. Every single other state in Mexico claimed its own independence. California was considered independent by themselves. Durango, Michoacan. So Mexico was not united. It was a lot of infighting, a lot of miscommunication to go on. Eventually, what we see is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo will eventually sign over what we think of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, parts of New Mexico, and parts of Colorado to the United States for $15 million in cash. So half of what President Polk wanted, doubling the continental size of the United States. The stipulation with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was that the Mexicans living in California would keep their land. All of California. So if you're a Mexican and you lived in California, if you lived in, Chula Vista, if you lived in El Cajon, you would keep your land. If you owned Rancho San Diego, if you were the rancher on Rancho San Diego, that was yours. No one would take it from you. That was the stipulation. That would not get ratified by Congress, and as we'll see in a little bit, especially after right around 1848 to 1849, with gold being found in California, a mad rush of Anglo immigrants into California. Now, the one thing what this helps out with the United States is, in order for a state to gain statehood, you need to have a large white population. You need to have a large white population to ensure statehood. And that's why a lot of states, like even New Mexico, take a long time to eventually gain statehood. It's not because it's not geographical area, it's how many census white people you have. During this period, all the Californios, those Mexican Americans, were labeled as white as a way to up the census and the population of white people in California. 10 years later, when you have to redo the census, Mexican Americans not labeled white anymore. They already made California the state, so you can now recategorize. Race is a institutional. It's created, right? It's created and serves a purpose for those that are in charge. And right here, race, to benefit the federal government of gaining statehood for California, and also we're going to see other race laws in California that will prohibit Mexicans as well as Chinese immigrants from setting up kind of like mines to look for gold. You couldn't, and we'll see different laws that prevented Mexicans and even Native Americans from moving around and stuff like that. So what we have next, shortly after the California is granted statehood, 1851 is the Federal California Land Act. This is going to be important because these two laws right here, the Federal California Land Act and the Greaser Act, are going to be the catalysts that are going to create our historical figures that are going to be the inspiration for the historical Zorro. So in 1851, you have the federal government of the United States invalidating every single Mexican and Spanish land grant. So any land owned by any Mexican or Spanish descendant is revoked. You can't do it. So there's a court system, you can appeal it, but everyone mostly that owns these land and property speaks Spanish. You needed someone that speaks English, so you need a bilingual translator. That costs money. You also have to pay court fees. That costs money. You also have squatters. What are squatters? Squatters are people that can sit in your house, in your land, and claim it. And if you don't take over the payments or whatnot, you don't own that house anymore. Let's just say, like, you go to work in the morning and you come back and the family now live in your house. Like, what's going on here? They're like, oh, we moved in. It's like, no, you didn't. This is my house, my grandmother's house. We've been living here forever, 3 generations. You have to leave. Like, no, squatters actually have rights in the United States and in certain parts of California. So it's like the people squatting in your house, you cannot violently throw them out. And so what these squatters would do would just, wait you out. So as you're going to work, because you have to pay for a bilingual translator, to pay for lawyers because they're expensive, court fees, and by the time you make the appeals, a lot of that didn't pass. So a lot of the appeals that were made because of this California Land Act were not heard. And so a lot of Mexicans and Spanish descended people lost a lot of land, a lot of their ancestral land. Granted, this was land of the Kumeyaay and other First Nations people here, but what you have is the reservation system that's going to be put into place, and a direct relation relates to the Greaser Act. In order to prevent Mexicans and indigenous people from leaving and going to look for gold, you have the Greaser Act that's paid. Now, greaser is a derogatory term. It's said because the Mexicans look very greasy with their long dark hair, and so any Mexican or any Native American, and that's what's in the law, that was just standing around loitering, you would be arrested. And keep in mind, you go to be arrested, 13th Amendment, you're pretty much a slave, and you're going to be working on the different roadways and whatnot, mistreatment. We also have the Greaser Act as a way to prevent Native Americans from leaving their reservations. So to keep them in the reservation system. So like when you go to Viejas or Verona, those are reservations. Those indigenous people could not leave. If they were seen outside of the reservation, they would be arrested. It prevented Mexicans from traveling from town to town. So you couldn't travel from, like, let's say Chula Vista up to San Diego or National City, you would be arrested. Or if you're standing outside loitering, you would be arrested. So you have these race-based laws that were used to threaten and intimidate a lot of Mexican Americans, and Native Americans. One such sad incident is the story of Juanita. Now, the Juanita is another kind of was a derogatory term used by a lot of Anglo Americans at this time for any Mexican woman. So the hanging of Juanita is a story of this young lady. We really don't know her name, just called the hanging of Juanita. Right around 1851, right after the federal land grant, who was accused of idolatry, just any gender nasty thing you think of, and she was hung. Public display, and it was it brought a lot of Anglo Americans to watch and view while this is happening. And it wasn't just Juanita, but you have a lot of Mexican American men who were lynched during this time. You have that also happening to freed blacks and black slaves in the South, in the United States, being lynched by racist mobs, and the same was happening in California. And so this is the background, right? You have a new country, the United States. Where's the police at? There is no police at this time. You have California Rangers that are out there to protect Anglo Americans, not there to protect Mexican Americans or Native Americans or Chinese immigrants. They're not there to help them out. They're there to ensure the safety and protection of Anglo Americans. So there is really no police force The Rangers are there to enforce the greaser laws to prevent Mexicans from loitering, from traveling, Native Americans also from leaving the reservations. And so with all this, with the land grant of losing your land, to the violence that we see, not just to Juanita, but to other Mexican American women and Mexican American men, this is the social political background that we see going on. And we have individuals, banditos, in the eyes of Anglo Americans, but for a lot of Mexicans, a lot of Californios, a lot of Mexican Americans, considered as heroes. One individual, Joaquin Murrieta, he was a young gentleman from Mexico who traveled up to Northern California with his wife. They're about 18 years old, very young. They're excited. They're participating in they're finding gold up north. This is like right on the precipice of 1848, right before the gold rush of 1849. And they do find gold. They set up. They have. They make money. They find gold. They're doing well. And so one day, as he's looking for more gold, Anglo Americans stop him. They harass him. They tie up his wife and they assault her and kill her in front of him. And they leave him to die. He will then go, Joaquin, to retrieve the body of his dead wife and bury her body. About a couple of months later, when Joaquin is trying to he lost his money, he lost his land. He's with his brother-in-law, and they're trying to he's working at a saloon, and his brother-in-law just bought a horse, a brand new horse. And back then, a horse is like a brand new car, right? A brand new pimped out car that his brother-in-law bought. But some Anglo Americans, some miners, thought that his brother-in-law stole the horse, and to be a horse thief was really bad during this time and place. So the Anglo Americans, accosted his brother-in-law, lynched him, took the horse. Joaquin tried to help out his brother-in-law, but they beat him. Later that night, Joaquin would seek revenge. At night, he would, in the cover of darkness, he would go and he found the Anglo Americans that killed his brother-in-law, and sought revenge and started to pay back all the violence that was done to his wife, to his brother-in-law. And soon he would find other Mexican Americans that also are dealing with the same racist kind of policies that were enacting on them, from lynching to violence done to their families and wives. So you had a small band that would go out and just attack Anglo Americans, whether it's stagecoaches or whatnot. But it was a small band, and what they'll do is they'll steal from the rich, give to the poor. Very much like a Robin Hood story. They were well received. They're protected by a lot of Mexican Americans in the region that there were, the banditry at that time and place. Eventually, we don't know when, but there was a lot of Joaquins at this time. No one really knew what Joaquin looked like. A lot of the descriptions was he was Mexican, but long hair, a mustache, and big eyes. And that was the one thing the Anglo Americans always said at nighttime when they saw was the big whites of his eyes. Now, this racial profiling goes hand in hand during the same time period where you have individuals like from Europe, like Caesar, forgot his last name, but would create this image of the criminal man. And it's right around the same time period in the late 19th century where Caesar Lambruschi, where he could look at somebody just by looking and classify and say with certainty that they were a criminal based on the sharpness of the nose, if they had a unibrow, how big their eyes were. Now, if you think about it, when you think of like villains in cartoons, right? Goatee, pointy nose, sharp eyes, all of that are the characteristics right from Caesar Lambruschi's Criminal Man. One person that continued that story was a person named Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula fits the same personification of the criminal man. The widow's peak, big eyes, sharp teeth, all that. Very sexual. Going to take the Victorian aged women. That is the criminal man. that was created during this time period in Europe, and eventually would be adopted into the United States. So you have this, racial profiling that is being conducted. Like, so any Mexican, right, that has long black hair and big eyes and a mustache is called a Joaquin. And so what you have is all these Mexican men that are being attacked by these California Rangers, by these vigilante groups, being attacked this period because they think they might be Joaquin Murrieta. We don't know if he's eventually captured or not, but we do know his story lived on by a novelist, John Roland Rich, or by his Cherokee name, Yellowbird. Now, John Roland Ridge, also saw in Joaquin Murrieta the same injustices that were done to his people, the Cherokee, under Andrew Jackson during the Trail of Tears, the relocation of Native Americans from their region, would be like in Georgia to Oklahoma. So he saw and sympathized with Joaquin Murrieta and created this story of this California bandit that wasn't really a bandit, that was, living in a time period that he was trying to fight these social injustices, trying to, seek revenge for those that of his dead loved ones, to avenge what would not bring him justice, and to seek out justice in his own way. And it's that story, the life and adventures of Joaquin Murrieta by John Roland Ridge, that would be the inspiration for the story of Johnston with his The Curse of Capistrano, and one of the stories of the Zorro stories. But the story and who the historical Zorro doesn't end just with Joaquin Murrieta. We also have this other gentleman, Salomon Pico. Salomon Pico comes from a very affluent family. Pio Pico was one of the last Mexican governors in California. Salomon Pico actually fought in the Mexican-American War, with the Mexicans, the Californios, against the United States. Something to keep in mind too is, after California gained statehood, a lot of Mexican Americans were viewed as the enemy, because a lot of these Anglo immigrants are coming in. The United States just fought against the Mexican Americans, and now they see them side by side. So it's very much a you're the enemy, right? Like, oh, I can't believe you're walking the same area as me. I can't believe you're breathing the same air as me. I can't believe you claim that horse is yours. So what we have is Salomon Pico from a very affluent family, from a ranch. His wife, also in the same manner like Joaquin Murrieta, unfortunately, is killed by a band of Anglo Americans, and so right around the Gold Rush area period. And so he tries to seek his own justice in his own way, and in a very interesting way, he starts to sell horses. How is that bringing justice? In the city of Los Alamos, he would sell horses just on the lower edge of the city, as the miners would go buy the horses, go to the main city, collect more of their goods, and then travel up to the mines that were further up north to do the gold mining. Well, Salomon Pico would sell the Anglo-Americans the horses. They'll go to the city, get what they needed, start traveling, and then he would ambush them, take their money, take back the horses, and then keep the money and sell the horses to the next group of Anglo-Americans making their way up. Now, they never attacked Californians, never attacked any Spanish-speaking Mexican-Americans. All of it was focused on Anglo-Americans because of the social injustices that were done onto Salomon Pico and his family. Eventually, Salomon Pico would come really close to being captured. He would actually escape and flee down to Mexico, evading capture, and then live the rest of his life in Mexico, where he'll eventually pass away. Another claimant or another inspiration for the historical Zorro is Tiburcio Vasquez. He lives right after the Gold Rush era. In a similar manner, he's in like the LA area region, so a little closer to our area than Murrieta and Salomon Pico. And the same thing, he's stealing stagecoaches, ranches, banks, general stores, anything that's owned by Anglo-Americans, because again, the social injustices, a lot of what he's done to his family, to his friends, his loved ones. he's enacting out. He's finding justice in his own way. And you see this quote right here when he's finally captured. I believe we were unjustly and wrongfully deprived of the social rights that belong to us. I mean, there's no one to call for help. There is no police to help you. The California Rangers are not there to help you. And so who is going to help you? It's your own brethren, your own quote unquote race. And so what you have is Tervicio Vasquez seeking out justice for all the injustices happening to him during this time and place. He will be captured. He will be sent to San Francisco, where he will be hung. But what we have is the lasting legacy. I mean, there's a health center named after him. There's a high school also named after him, and this geographical area also in the LA area called the Vasquez Rocks, all named after him, and a lasting legacy to remember, Tervicio Vasquez as someone who's helping fight the social injustices that were done onto the Mexican Americans during this time and place. And then we have one more, not of Mexican descent or Spanish descent, but we have an indigenous person named Estalancio. Estalancio is from an indigenous group up north, the Laquesami tribe. And so he was indoctrinated into the mission system up in San Jose. Eventually, he would grow tired. This is during colonial Spanish era. So this is way before Murrieta, before Tervicio Vasquez, way before Solomon Pico. This is right during the expansion of Spain, building mission systems in California. Estancilao would, be indoctrinated into the mission system, and eventually he would not like it. He would fight against it, and while he was in the mission system, he started to learn a lot of military tactics because he could see, the presidios are close by, the Spanish and the military formations. So he would go after he escaped and teach his fellow indigenous communities how to fight against the Spanish. They would conduct a lot of guerrilla type warfare. And anytime he would raid or fight or destroy missions, he would leave his little mark, S, on the buildings where he left. The mark of Zorro, right? The Z, the mark of S for Estancilao. And just like Tervicio Vasquez, the lasting legacy, right? The Stanislaus River, Stanislaus County are named in his honor. Fighting again the injustices that were done to him by the Spanish this time. And so what we see is this fighting against social injustices, and it just doesn't happen during this time and place in the 19th century, late 20th century, but it continues on throughout U.S. history. Here we have Mendez versus Westminster, decade before Brown versus Board of Education. This is right here in Westminster, in California, Orange County, fighting against racial segregation in schools. We have Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, advocating during the civil rights movement for along with the Filipinos. The Filipino Americans actually started the farm workers protest first, and what we have is Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta joining in on that cause as well. Fighting the injustices that were done on a lot of the Mexican American farmers. And then just like recently, last week, we have is the DACA, right, being repealed, and the constant during the whole Trump presidency. And I didn't have enough slides of that for this presentation of attacks, the verbal rhetoric, the killing of Mexican and Mexican Americans in El Paso, by a white terrorist, because they're Mexican, right? This constant fighting, and how can one fight against all these injustices? And I'm going to put my little soapbox here, is by voting for politicians, voting for those that will help out in your cause. And I know it's very hard right now, especially looking at trusting politicians, especially politicians that you might see in LA from last week, using these racial slurs against Blacks, Jews, and Armenians. And that's something I have to keep in mind. Not every Mexican is like that. Not every Mexican American is like that. That is a construction that keeps trying, a racial and class kind of structure that keeps trying to be put on Blacks and Browns, right? You keep Blacks and Browns separate because it's harder, it's easier to fight them, right? The institution, right? The institution wants Black, brown, yellow, red to keep fighting each other. Because if we're united, we're strong. Just like Corletta King and Cesar Chavez here in the civil rights movement, right? We're stronger together. They know that. They're scared of that. And together, united, we will win. But we can't win unless you vote, you get out and vote, and you make your voice heard. Thank you again for coming to the presentation of the Mask of Zorro. If you have any questions, I'll entertain some questions during this time. We can end the recording at this time as well.